Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's topic where we're going to be talking about designing UI for different aspect ratios. And we'll also look at some tips and tricks with the UI that you might not know about. So, with that, we'll get started. Okay, so when we look at designing UI for different aspect ratios, the very first thing we need to do is we need to understand how different aspect ratios will work with your screen resolution for different devices. Now, if you understand this, you can pretty much set this up at the very beginning and not have to worry about it. But you can still change your aspect ratios by coming into here and changing the screen resolution to whichever device resolution you want to test at that point in time. So we can switch as easily by just going into here, and this is just doing a test to see how everything looks at that aspect ratio. But how does that affect the UI? Okay, to understand how that works, let's create a UI image, and we'll reset the position of this to be in the center of the screen, and we'll change its color so we can easily see to a greenish color. Let's make it maybe a dark green. And let's go to the canvas, and we know that we're working with our device. It's a 1920 by 1080 device, but because we're in portrait mode, we are working with a 1080 by 1920 resolution. So we need to take, in the canvas scaler here, we need to make sure that we're no longer using the constant pixel size, but we will now use the scale screen size. Now, it's now put in these options here with reference resolution, and this is what we are designing our game for. So my device is 1920 by 1080, and I'm working and designing it to that resolution. So that's what I put in. And because, as I said, we're in portrait, so we put in 1080 by 1920. So once we've done that, how does that affect the screen resolution, you say? Well, let's change our image to now fill the screen. So rather than having a 100 by 100 image, let's make it 1080, which is the width, by 1920. And as you can see, it has now filled the screen. So it's basically scaled that to now fit the screen. You might think, well, that's what I want to do, and I go off and I start creating all my UI. But then someone comes along and says, but the UI looks different on my device. And it will, because we've still got something that we need to understand. So if we were to change this, say, to 1080 by 2160, you can see that the top and the bottom no longer fit to the top and the bottom of the screen. So that means that, because the way Unity works is, okay, if it was normal landscape, the top and the bottom would stay in the same position all the time, and it would always scale out from the left and the right. But because we're in portrait mode, that becomes the top and the bottom. And this is why the green is no longer touching the edges of the screen. So how can we fix that? Well, if we go back to the canvas, we can see here we've got a match width and height. So by default, it thinks that you're always going to be using the landscape mode. But because we're using portrait, we need to change that across to the height. So no matter what screen resolution we are running in, it will always fit the size of the screen. And in this case here, don't worry about that, because that's basically just the edge of the window. It's not the actual edge of the camera. Now, if you're actually coming across a device resolution that is not listed here, you can always add your own, and you can add it in here to test it against that. But once you've pretty much done these steps, as far as the UI is concerned, you have pretty much set it up to basically work correctly. Let's now look at an example. Now, I've got this screenshot here of a game called 2048. It's another tutorial that I've been working on. And I'll just drag that in here for now. Oh, and I'll also get rid of this image because we no longer need that. And I'll just move this up a little bit so that it's easier to work with. Okay, so I'll drag the canvas down so that it's out of the way. So let's look at how we can look at breaking this down into easier to manage pieces. And the very first thing that sticks out is we can see that the screen can be split into two sections. The top half of the section can be the game information, whereas the bottom half can then be the actual game board itself. What I'm going to do now is create, I'm just very basically going to look at creating the bottom section of the game board because I need to get that out of the way so we can work on and focus on the UI. I won't stress too much about what's going on with this second part because that can be explained in the actual game tutorial itself. So don't worry too much about it, but just rest assured I am going to create a new canvas, but I will explain why I'm using a new canvas. And I am going to set this up very similar, but the only difference is I'm going to use a 600 by 800. And again, don't worry about it because I'll explain that in the tutorial itself, in the game tutorial itself. And I'm going to then create an image, and I'm going to make this 550 by 550, and I'm going to give that a color of BBADA0, which is the color of the background. And I'm also going to create it with this image here, so it gives it the round curves, which is an image that is part of the tutorial itself. Now, as you can see, it's not anchored properly, so we're just going to very quickly anchor this down to the bottom of the screen. And we're going to change the Y position to 350. Now, don't worry that it doesn't fit precisely because the actual image in the background is probably a little bit different to what I've got here. So just rest assured that we're going to now focus on the top section of the information of this section here. Right, so we're going to now look at doing the top section here, or this information section up here. So actually, I'll rename this to, let's call this board canvas, or game board canvas, doesn't really matter. We can name this anything we like. And I'll call this information canvas. And I'll bring that down to the bottom. I'm now going to create a empty container, and I always work on empties and then build up as I'm going along. You can do this any way you like, but I just find this easier for myself. And this is going to be at the top container. Now, this top container is going to be all of this information in here, basically. Yeah, it's going to be all that information in there. Now, this container is going to be at the very top of the screen. So the very first thing we need to make sure is that we anchor it to the top, but we also need to stretch it out across the width as well. So we're going to select this, and we're also going to make sure that it's anchored there. And you can see that that's exactly what it's done in here. So, excuse me, if I zoom in, you can actually now see that that's what it's done. Now, the other thing too is that what I need to do is I need to now change the height of that. Now, I know that through all my experimentation that the numbers that I'm going to be putting in works for what I'm doing. You may need to continually keep adjusting these till it suits what you need. But for this demo, I'm going to make it 570. And as you can see, Unity being Unity, it's now changed this position. So what I usually do is I usually just come back in here and just click on that, and it basically reforces it back to where it's supposed to be. So if you are changing the numbers and you are finding that this is not working for you, that will be the reason why. And because I've done that, I now need to make sure that it's minus 50. And actually, that doesn't seem to be working right. Let's just put that back in there again. And I'll put 50 and 50. Now, the other thing that I need to do now is that this is going to be our container that's going to hold all these elements. So we need to then look at, well, we're going to make them vertical so that we can do this, this, and this. But I'm going to do it in a way that this top section is one, this bottom section is another. So I'll split them into two layout groups. But the first thing I'll need to do is actually put in a layout group. Now, the other thing is that I'm going to make it so that the child is going to control the size and the going to use the actual scale of the height of the child itself. Now, in this case, it works for what I'm doing. It may not work for you, depending on what your UI is going to look like. So it's a little bit of trial and error at this stage, but you will get to a point where sometimes it may not be working and you may need to delete the object and recreate it sometimes. It's just Unity being Unity. So if that happens to me, I will do that as it goes through. So now that we've created that container, I don't know why, but that should be 50 down, but that might be come across that as we actually, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the pivot point, and I'm just going to make that a 1. And I'm also going to change that to a 0. Now, what I've done is I've changed the pivot point up into this top corner. Don't worry about it for now. Just rest assured that it works for what I'm doing. And I'm now going to make this a minus 50. And then that's basically now, as you can see, this is the beginning of our container. And if I just, scroll it up a little bit, you can now start to see how it's going to pan out. Now, don't worry too much about the spacing. We'll get to fixing all that up a little bit later. Okay, so now I'm going to create two halves. Now, I'm not going to go into why just yet, but just rest assured I will explain it a little bit later on. But for now, I'm going to create two containers. Again, I'm just going to create them as empties. And I'm going to name the top one, top half. And I'm going to name the other one, bottom half. Now, the other thing that I need to do is that, sorry, I'm trying to read my notes at the same time again. Okay, so let's work on the top half. Now, the top half itself, I'm going to now look at doing a horizontal container this time. So we'll add in the horizontal layout group. And this time, we are going to have the width is going to be controlled by the child scale. And so is the height. Okay. And we'll also make sure that it's a height of 200. And we're also going to make sure, actually, yeah, no, that's it. So now we've got the top half, we've got the two containers sorry, we've got the top half, we've got the horizontal layout, and we're actually going to create two more containers for this one. And again, I'm going to use the empties, and I'm going to create this one, and I'm going to rename this one. I'm going to call it left container, and I'm going to call this one right container. Now, as you can see, I've got the top half there, and the bottom half is, hang on, something's not right here. Sorry, no, that's all right. As you can see, sorry, I'm just going back and forth with the notes. So just excuse that. So basically the top half, we now have that set up here, and we've got the left container and we've got the right container. And as you can see, the horizontal is actually working, but we now need to go into the left container, and we're going to add a text image, a text container. So we'll add that. I won't rename that, but for now, let me just go back to my notes. We're going to call this 2048. Oops. Put in 2048. We're going to put in a we're going to make this into a scale across the center. So that means it's going to fit within our container, and it's going to scale it nicely. And we're also going to make sure that the font size is going to be a size of 200. The color is going to be, rather than guess the color, I'm just going to go up here and actually select it. And as you can see, it's not working properly just yet, but we'll get to that. Don't worry about it. And we'll also make sure that it's going to be center aligned, and we're also going to make sure that it's in the middle as well. Okay, so that should be all we need to do for that for now. Now, you'll notice that it's still not working. Don't worry about that. We'll get to that. And let's do the right container. And this time, we're actually going to create a button. So we'll go in and we'll create, we'll call it a TextMesh Pro button. And sorry, let me just double check. Sorry, I know what I'm going back and forth, and I forgot one small detail on this one. We want to make this 500, and we want to make this a height of 200. Sorry, I am getting there slowly. So let's go back to the right container, and we're going to do the same thing with that one. We're going to make that a width of 500 and a height of 200. Okay. So as you can see, we've now got the 2048 and we've got the button. Now the button itself, we're just very quickly going to make sure that it's a size of 340 and a height of 130. And we're also going to make sure that it is anchored to the top. We're also going to make sure the color is this color here. I'm going to change it to this color. And we're going to make sure, and we're also going to change the button image itself. And we're going to change that to, now, why is that not working? Sorry, the UI sprite here. Sorry, we're going to change that to be the white rounded one. So that gives us that image. And once we've done that, we can then go into the actual text itself, and we can change this to new game. And we're also going to change the text color to, sorry, I'm just going to my notes. So I'm just going to grab this from my notes, and I'm just going to grab that color for now and click on there, and we're going to make it that color. So that's the text color. And we're also going to, actually just close that there. We're going to change the font size to 50. And that's it. So what we've done now is we've now created, although I think, let me just double check. Let me just remove that for now. Yeah, it doesn't look like the right color, but that's all right. We can work on that later. All right, so let's work on the next section, which is going to be the score and the best score. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a container. So we'll create an empty. And with the container, we need to do a horizontal, as you can see, because we've got the 2 there. So we need to add a horizontal. And we're also going to put the spacing of this horizontal to 45. We're going to do middle center. And we're only going to do a child force expand on the height. We'll quickly name this container. And we're going to create 2 panels for each one here. So we'll create 2 more empties. And with these ones, we're going to add an image. We're going to add the source to be the white rounded circle. We're going to change the color to be this color. And we'll call this one score panel. And we'll call this one best score panel. Okay. Now we need to change the properties. So 450 by 180 for both of them. I probably should have selected both, but that's all right. So 450 by 180. And we've got the container size wrong. We need to change the width to 980 by 150. Now, you'll notice that I've changed the width manually here, and that's going to match this width. Now, you need to trust me on this one. There was some issues trying to get it all to work, and at the end of the day, it was best to just create this width as 980. So when you come across to doing it your way with your scenario, just take in mind that sometimes you need to do that. All right, so the score panel, we 450 by 180, yep. So we need to add a container for this one because we need to now create the score and the actual text for this. So we'll create a container in here. And this container is going to anchor to the top, and we're going to stretch it out. We're going to create a -75 so that it's going to sit in the right location because we need to push it up a little bit. We're going to create the height of this container as 150. And we're also going to add a vertical layout group. And we're going to add a top and bottom of 20. We're going to create a middle center so that it creates it in the center of it, middle. And we're also going to add a child to control the child size. And it's also going to do a force width. on that. All right, so we're going to do exactly the same thing for the best. And again, we'll just call it container. And again, we're going to add it to the top so that it's sitting up there. We'll make this 75. And we'll make this 150. Now, I'm pretty sure if I was to do that again, it'll probably go back to... Yeah, okay. So if I change the height to 150 and then did that, then that's where we get that minus 75. Just keep that in mind for next time. And again, we're going to create a vertical layout on this. And again, we're going to create a width and bottom of 20. Again, we're going to do middle center. And again, we're going to do the width and the same as the previous one. And we're going to go back to the container and we're going to create two texts. And the first one's going to be for the score text. So we'll call that score text. So we'll rename that. And we'll add another UI for the text and we'll call this one score. Again, we'll do the same thing. We'll add another UI, Text Mesh Pro. We're going to call this one best score text. And we'll duplicate that and we'll call this one best score. Okay, so what we need to do now is I'm going to highlight these because the properties on these are almost all going to be identical. They're all going to be a height of 80. Actually, they're not all going to be identical, but we're going to do what we can first. Font of 60. And we're going to change the color. I think that's not the right color. I don't know why it's picking up the wrong color there, but anyway, let's get the color in here. Okay. Still not the right color for some reason. Oh, hang on. That's better. All right. So I'll just quickly turn these ones off and we'll go back to here. Change that to score. We'll change this to best. And we'll make that 0. And we'll make that 0. Okay, so let's just recap. 980 by 150, 00045, yep. Score panel, 450, 180. Yeah, so that's all looking good. Now, don't worry about the fact that this is out for now, because we'll get to that in a minute. Now, the last one is that I'm going to create another container off here, and I'm going to call this one the information container. I'll just call it information for now. And inside that, I'm going to create another container. I'll leave that as game object for now. You can call this anything you like. But for now, I'll go back to the information and we'll make sure that the properties on this are set up correctly. And we need it to anchor to there. We need actually something's not right. So I'll get to, yeah, something's not right. Top container, information. Okay, I'll work on that one in a minute. Bottom half. Okay, so what I've done is I've put it in the wrong spot, so I need to put it in here. Okay. All right. So we've got that out of the way. I need to make this 980 as to the previous one. And I'm also going to leave it at 100 because it's going to change later on anyway. All right, so the container underneath, I'm going to make sure that it is going to fill that container. And I'm also going to just double check everything. And I'm going to add a horizontal layer. And this is going to be the two going across, the text and the actual leaderboard. So let's add the horizontal container, and we're going to put a spacing of 40. And this time we're not going to have anything controlling the sizes like we've done in the previous ones. So I need to add one text, and we'll call this one how to play. Doesn't really matter, but we'll call that how to play. I'm going to copy the text from my notes so that I don't have to type it all. The size of the text is going to be 48. The color is going to be the same color as the score. Text. And everything looks okay. And we're going to change the width to 680, and we're going to make it a height of 100. All right, so that's the text taken care of. Now for the leaderboard, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add another empty. I'm just going to call this leaderboard. And I can't spell for shit. That's all right. And underneath that, actually, before I do, let me change the width and the height on that. And underneath that, we're going to create another button. And we'll do again a text mesh button. And we're going to anchor this one to the bottom. Sorry, wrong one. We're going to anchor that to the bottom. And we're going to change the width and the height to 260 by 130. And we're going to make sure that the position on that is at 0 on the Y. And we're going to do the same thing as we've done before. We're going to change the UI sprite to white rounded. We're going to make sure that the color is that color. The text, we're going to change to leaderboard. The font size is going to be 36. And again, this one we're going to change to a white vertex on this one. Some spacing missing here. Let's double check the spacing on that. It says 40. I've got 40, but I don't know, maybe make it 50, maybe 60. You can always change it to suit yourself later on down the track. So that, I mean, the other thing too is, I mean, the image is, oops, wrong one. This image here is the wrong one anyway. So, so basically that is now the, let me just change the camera to get rid of the firebox. We'll make it a solid color. We'll make it, I don't know, sort of a whitish color so that we can actually see what's going on. So the other thing, oh, I forgot one more thing. I think this is meant to be, yep, that's better. Okay, so that is now laid out correctly. So that is what we need to do. This is how we anchor stuff. We create containers within containers to basically outline everything that we're looking to outline. So when we actually go and change the, well, that didn't work. All right, so what's going on here? Okay, so I made a critical error at the very beginning of this video, and I made the comment, and I don't even know why I made this comment, but I got this wrong. My apologies. I had it the wrong way around. So in the very beginning, I said to make this at the height, but what we want to do is make this at the width. Because it's at the width that the UI is actually going to be scaling at. So that I really apologize for that. But what we can now do is we can now change the UI to any aspect ratio, and it's always going to be the correct scaling and everything. So as you can see, it's changing it to different different aspect sizes, and it's all looking great. Now, as you can see, when you get to certain aspect ratios as well, we do get this in here. That is probably not much you can do about that, just depending on your game. The reason why in this case it's doing that is because we've got two canvases, and we've got this canvas down here set aside to just have the game board, and we've got this canvas set aside to do just the information at the top. Now, I also promised you some tips and tricks with the UI. Now, you remember I've put two canvases here. Now, Unity, when you make changes to a canvas, it redraws everything. So if something in that canvas gets dirty, the entire canvas has to be recalculated and redrawn. But we can get around that. And the way we do it is if we go into the, the bottom half here, and I'm going to show you something. And if we go into the, we go into the container here, and what we're going to do is we're going to click on the score panel, and we're going to add a canvas there. And when we add that canvas, we're going to take the container and we're going to drag it onto there. And we're going to do the same thing for the best score. We're going to do the same thing. Add a canvas and drag the container onto there. Now, visually, that has changed nothing. But when you run the program, it will make a huge difference in the fact that everything around here is basically considered static. The only thing that is changing is the score in here. Now, that basically means that this canvas that I've selected here and this canvas here are only the two canvases that are going to become dirty. And because there is only a little amount in here, that means that only this is going to get updated and redrawn instead of the entire hierarchy. And that is one of the tricks that you can deploy. And I mean, it's probably not a huge deal in this because it's actually not that much. But when you get into a scenario where you've got a lot in your UI, this can make a big difference in far as performance goes on redrawing your UI. Well, that's it for another video, and thanks for watching. If you want to help support the channel, then please do subscribe, and make sure that you hit the bell to get notified when we add more content. So with that, we'll see you next time.